Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics Podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the cut to my paste, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
Today we are talking about the Phoenix.
So the Phoenix of Greek legend mostly is a bird that is said to gather tinder around and burn itself in a pyre and then rise from the pyre again as a new, freshly reborn bird.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually been, there's a lot of different iterations on this idea because it's an old myth and pretty popular. So
yeah, it's also been heavily reinterpreted in modern media.
Oh yeah, they're all over the place now. There's lots of different versions of it, so there's no real strict canon. In fact, even the Greeks were saying that this was originally an Egyptian. And literally, they were just saying this is some weird bird that lives in Egypt that does this.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no real broad claim to it. There's no strict canon. But the theme of the Phoenix and fire is very closely linked.
Mm-hmm. As well as reincarnation.
Yeah, and of reincarnation. So you'll often see the Phoenix as a symbol of rebirth, but also it's strongly associated with a lot of sun imagery and things about the solar cycle where the sun comes back up every day. So there's a lot of interesting symbolism in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's ripe for us to do some work with.
Yeah. In some interpretations, the bird is just perpetually on fire, which begs the question how it then self-immolates.
Yeah. Well, there's the variant where instead of it'll be on fire all the time and then it just slowly burns out and the fire goes away and then it rises again from the ash.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. If you're ever making a campfire, you can also pull that same maneuver where something will burn down all of the way and look like it's out, and then you just add fresh tinder to it, and the burning embers will relight that, and you get sort of an effect like that. So there's a lot of good symbolism in there.
Oh yeah.
So do we want to take this in a strictly biological route, or do we want to go magical first with it? Do we want to talk about a really weird bird that has great powers, or take it as, this is the historical origin of this weird mystical creature?
Well, I'm always a fan of going the biological route whenever we're able.
Well, there's some cool parallels in nature where there's a number of different species of tree that actually they cause themselves to burn up in order to cause forest fires so that their offspring can rise and outcompete the other plants in the area.
Interesting.
To the point where some of them will allow themselves and their adult stages to dry out and become essentially like tinder.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a whole classification of plants, not just trees, where they stay closed up until a fire blows over them, at which point they start to germinate in the aftermath. And so a cycle of forest fires becomes part of the life cycle of these plants. And so you could imagine something of an animal doing the same sort of thing, where it lays an egg, and then that egg does not germinate and hatch until it is consumed by flames.
Interesting.
And that could definitely lead to a sort of an association between this rebirth and with these animals.
Yeah.
There's also the black kite, kite being a kind of bird,
mm-hmm.
will spread fires in order to flush out prey. They will find an area where a fire is going, and they'll swoop down and pick up a piece of twig or a branch or something that's on fire and drop it further away in order to spread the fire more, because little animals will be forced out of the underbrush by that, and they will then go down and have a meal, which I think is fantastic.
Yes, when birds have mastered fire, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
It's metal as hell. They are actually firebombing the forest in order to flush out their prey, which is fantastic.
I love the idea of this kind of just inspired me to kind of go a different route with it. What if you tied in the Prometheus myth in with this a little bit?
Yeah.
This black kite is a little bit sort of the progenitor of fire for birds.
Yeah. A particular one of them discovered this trick and then taught the others, or
yeah,
that's cool. So we could combine a couple of those ideas into a single species where you have this. It's the Phoenix, the proto Phoenix,
mm-hmm.
And it has highly adapted itself to be caught up into this cycle of forest fires where. Mm-hmm. maybe even to the point where they, like I said, like they lay an egg and they have to have that egg consumed by fire before it will hatch. But in the meantime, it's very like protected. Like this is something that some species of bird have to deal with, where another, like while they're away from the nest hunting or whatever, another bird like a cuckoo will come in and actually like push eggs out of the nest.
Mm-hmm.
This doesn't, as I understand it, typically happen to like predatory species like raptors. But it's definitely something that like songbirds have to deal with. And so the idea of maybe like the phoenix has a defense against that, which is like this thick, strong eggshell that can survive being pushed out. In fact, maybe they don't even like really tend to it. They just leave it, like they lay an egg and just leave it. But it's so hard, like a rock, that like nothing can get into it until a forest fire comes in and burns off that outer protective layer.
That's kind of interesting. Something I kind of like the idea, and it kind of goes ties in that reincarnation a little bit, is like maybe it never actually lays its egg. Maybe it only ever has one egg, but to actually like hatch it, like something has to happen to its body, chemically speaking, that only happens by being burnt to death.
Or it's just like it's physically too big. Like as the egg develops inside it, it gets to the point where it can't safely lay it anymore.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because and inside that egg is a very well developed chick, one that's like when it hatches is going to be ready to fly nearly.
Mm-hmm.
But that means that the egg has to be so large that it can't be laid. And so like this can be bonkers. Have you ever seen a kiwi egg and the size of a kiwi? They're basically the same size.
Something kind of like that triggered my imagination there was
yeah.
So imagine like it's got this egg that it can never lay, and the egg is growing inside it to the point where maybe it gets to a point where it can't fly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it's in danger now.
Maybe it's like covered in this like really soft, fine, like downy feathers.
Okay.
And it has like a beak that's like really hard and like flint-like in material composition.
Okay.
And it's able to like strike rocks or something nearby to start a fire around it. And because it's got that downy like feathers and whatnot, it catches fire very easily. And that's just sort of the natural end of its life cycle, is when it can't fly anymore.
Right. I like the idea. Maybe they're sort of like social.
Mm-hmm.
They have a social structure, so that every once in a while one of them will start a fire in order to lay its egg and have the baby born. And when it does so, it starts a forest fire, which causes these favorable conditions to all the other phoenixes who are, still at their flying around stage.
Mm-hmm.
And they use that as an opportunity to do a lot of hunting. As that forest fire spreads, they gorge themselves on all the animals that are fleeing it, but they themselves are, completely safe because they can fly away.
Mm-hmm.
That could be cool.
No, I like that. Yeah.
That's very neat. And then like, because the parent isn't around anymore, the one that they, as a family, as a group, raise the chick, who is, more well-developed than most birds, but still needs like an older bird around to like show them the ropes and how to hunt and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
You don't see a lot of highly social birds. This is like you get flocks and things, but like they don't tend to raise each other's young, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I think the closest I can think of is like penguins.
Yeah, penguins will adopt young,
and these are practically anti-penguins.
Yeah, yeah, they are the firebenders to the penguins' waterbenders. Yeah, that's cool. I like that, and that frames this as like a phoenix legend growing out of just a regular, quote unquote regular. It's got a very strange life cycle, but it is a pretty regular bird. It's not magical in any way.
Yeah.
Of course, let's take another take on it. Let's go weird with magic.
Okay.
Let's go with a magical one where they're actually like a bird made of fire. What would that thing's life cycle be like? Where it's like this thing is an elemental of fire.
Okay. Well, I think like something you commonly see is like it like anything that burns over time, it's eventually going to burn out.
Yes.
So like there's kind of like a limited lifespan to every one of these things. So, but because of the whole phoenix being reborn from the ashes, there's just like it's a perpetual cycle of death, rebirth. I kind of like the idea that maybe like every time it dies and is reborn, it comes back and burns hotter or brighter or longer or larger. Like just each time like it dies and is reborn, it becomes more of a threat to everything around it.
Sort of then the cycle of rebirth becomes a little bit like something shedding its skin or shell, where it transfers in order to grow in some way. Like its current physical form can no longer keep up with the fire inside of it or something.
Interesting, yeah.
In fact, you could go, depending on how you want the sort of visuals of it or the aesthetic, you could either have it like burn out where the fire slowly dies over time until it becomes ash and then it rises from the ashes. Or maybe the opposite is that it gets hotter and hotter until it like explodes.
Okay, yeah.
And then the rebirth comes from that explosion and starts off small and gets bigger and bigger again. I think either of those would really work.
Yeah. I think that's kind of an interesting way to follow through on that. I also kind of like the idea that maybe in rare cases, 2 phoenixes are born from the death of one.
Yeah.
And because they're these immortal creatures, you have this like compounding problem where once there was 1, now there's 2, and then, oh no, now there's 4, et cetera, et cetera.
I like that also as a sort of asexual reproduction system where like this is a magical bird. It doesn't have the usual like 2 parents get together and do the deed and then they lay some eggs. I like the idea that they would just occasionally, like, it makes them alien, you know, especially for something that's like an elemental where it's not really biological in a lot of ways. That makes a lot of sense. So maybe it's one of those things where when they go through their cycle, they're going to have like a set number of possible changes. Like maybe they burn out or they blow up and then they come back bigger, or they burn out and they blow up and they come back hotter, or they burn out and blow up and then they come back as 2. Like it's this, they're not going to change too much at any one time. So it's a sort of gradual evolution.
What if
real quick. And speaking of evolution, yes, we know we've kind of turned phoenixes into Pokemon. That has previously been discussed, and we're just not going to address it beyond this sentence.
So I kind of also like the idea that what if the phoenix isn't necessarily the bird in this case, but it's the fire?
Like, yeah, I was thinking of them as sort of they're basically a fire elemental that just happens to look kind of bird-like. That's what I'm thinking.
And maybe the phoenix, like in these cases, it is whatever like it burns. So like in some cases it's a bird, but if like something happens to be burned and is consumed by the fires of the phoenix, like it could be any animal or object or something.
Oh, that's a neat idea where maybe in that cycle, the last thing it burns up, it takes on qualities of that.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool.
And because it's kind of like this intelligent fire, like maybe it focuses on one thing at a time or.
Right. And they tend to like maybe they have a proclivity to start in birds because that makes them highly mobile.
Mm-hmm.
But then over time they might, they become more intelligent as they get older, and they start to seek out other things. So then they become quite divergent because as each individual grows, it starts to think, oh, well, I would actually like to have more strength, more power. So I'm going to start seeking out things that will give me that rather than all of them developing along the same trajectory.
That's a really cool idea. Like, I feel like it's kind of an interesting idea, especially if like the thing that burns isn't necessarily, or the thing that the phoenix becomes isn't necessarily like immediately recognizable. Like, oh, it's on fire. That must be a phoenix. Like, maybe if it burns internally or something.
Yeah, or maybe. Yeah, like over time, like it's like we were talking about, maybe as they grow hotter over time, over the course of a cycle where they're going to be reborn, that first thing that they rise up as is indistinguishable from like a normal animal or normal object.
Yeah.
And then over time, the phoenix fire inside of them grows hotter and hotter, and more evidence of that becomes available until it's like undeniable that this thing is burning from the inside. That's really cool.
And then you get to introduce one of my kind of favorite tropes of the body snatcher, where you have this strange fire elemental spirit that has taken on the qualities of a person or animal or thing.
Yeah. They're maybe passing themselves off as human for a while, and then eventually the fire becomes too uncontrollably hot and they burst into flames, Human Torch style.
Yeah.
But like there's gradual things, like maybe it starts with their eyes just change color one day. Like it had been dark and then it becomes a sort of glowing red at some point.
Yeah.
And then their body temperature starts to heat up, and then, you know, like they start to be able to breathe fire because like they get these fire abilities coming back in, and it progresses over time until it just becomes undeniable, and then they burst. And that's sort of the end of their cycle. Like it accelerates, like it starts off slow, and as more and more of this fire comes back in, it consumes more and more of them until it like overtakes them, and they become this like straight up fire elemental.
So I remember when I was a young man and had the worries and anxieties of a young man. One of the things that was a frequent worry of mine was spontaneous human combustion.
Oh yeah,
just that at any point you could explode and burst into flame. And maybe this is how those myths and legends started, was these Phoenix people.
Yeah, where they're not actually like burning up and dying. They're bursting into flames and becoming something else. As part of a sort of natural cycle. So I guess that leads to the question of, you know, depending on, you know, how this rebirth cycle happens, maybe that Phoenix doesn't know what it is to start out with.
Oh yeah.
Or like, so like maybe they'll end up having access to some of those memories, but that when you first wake up, it's sort of amnesic, you know, or like it's a blank slate for a while. And then as the fire within them starts to grow and grow, then more and more of the knowledge and memories of what they actually are start to come back and start to like meld with the current personality. And that at that point, it starts to decide, you know, what is it going to take the form of next? What is it going to go for? And then also like, what of this current form is it going to bring with it?
It goes through fire puberty and then...
I guess that's technically a glow up at that point.
Oh God. Yes.
Yeah, that's cool. And so like, yeah. And so then maybe they have that last stage as they're becoming more and more fires, when they sort of decide what that next version is. Like, are they going to bifurcate and create an offspring when they next birth and have, you know, two of them come out? Or is it going to be, no, they're going to work on themselves and have a new iteration where they take over an elephant or something so they can be bigger. And I don't know, never forget, or whatever it is that they draw from burning out an elephant. It's kind of interesting. I guess we really do have to think about, do they have to like physically burn the objects they're learning from? Like, would the dying Phoenix have to like kill an elephant in order to like take on those qualities? Or would it just emulate it in a way? I'm curious.
I feel like the consumption by fire is and like the death and reincarnation is a very strong part of that.
Right, but if it's death versus if it's like actively killing. Like, are we making a serial killer creature that like has to kill other organisms?
That had been originally what I was thinking, but if you've got some other ideas, I'm certainly willing to hear.
I'm sort of trying to figure out what the oeuvre is. I think it does. If we're making a threatening creature, like this is a monster that is like going to be a problem in whatever story you're in, then I think making it like it has, in order to continue its life cycle, it has to kill other creatures is an interesting way to do that. An interesting way to make that like it's part of its life cycle. And maybe at some point as they become intelligent, like if you have one that like learns morals and becomes good, maybe it like is faced with the question of like, does it like do this in order to continue its life cycle, or does it stop here and burn out for the last time? That's kind of an interesting take on that, where like they then have to make the decision about whether or not they're going to continue that. But as a sort of animalistic version of themselves, they would, of course, you know, find something to burn and kill.
I do kind of like the idea that the Phoenix life cycle continues until it develops morals.
Yeah, it really could. It's the natural end to that progression. Or it gets so big that it starts burning out mountains and stuff.
Or the entire planet.
It
torches the planet and becomes a Phoenix planet.
Yeah. In fact, there's some parallels there with the molten core of a planet, or at least our planet. You could have it where either that is something that might happen if enough Phoenixes, or if a big enough Phoenix happens, or maybe it's one of those things where like, oh no, we're living on a planet where that's already happening. Like this thing's gestating for a while and it's going to erupt at some point and we're all going to die, but we don't know what the time scale is. That's kind of an interesting idea. In fact, maybe that is the world these things are living on, is one where, you know, the whole world is filled with Phoenix fire, and that the the little ones that we see on the surface are actually like escaped offspring. Like it's the spores of this phoenix fire within the planet. And so you'd see them like new ones coming out of volcanoes and stuff occasionally as this thing sort of shed off additional little bits of phoenix fire that then goes on to become its own phoenix.
Okay, I actually really like that idea of like this world where like the idea of phoenixes are just like house spirits or jinn in types of mythology where like any traveler on the road you meet could be a phoenix.
Yeah. In this world, like you could go with something like Aristotelian elements where it's, fire, earth, water, air. And like you have to have various combinations of them for life. And so like the fire might also be associated with life and life giving, because it often is, it shares a lot of qualities with living objects. It consumes, it produces, like any mammals produce heat, and fire sort of moves in a way that is reminiscent of animals. And so you could have this idea that like every creature contains a bit of phoenix fire within them. It's just that the actual phoenixes have more of it than others. And so maybe even that's what when they go and like consume another creature in order to pass on to their next cycle. Maybe that's part of the thing they're doing, is pulling some of that phoenix fire out of the creature and bringing it into themselves as they consume it.
Is it like sort of, do you think of it as some sort of like biological mandate where they're trying to like reclaim all the missing phoenix fire?
I hadn't thought of it as them sort of reclaiming it. I had thought of it as sort of like, oh, that is a resource I can use. Like this is me. Okay. Like it's kind of tasty. Like it almost seemed like food to me. Like it's, but you could go either way, where like maybe there's a sort of an attractive force to them, like where phoenixes, people with or creatures with a lot of phoenix fire in them that if like it's going to consume them, they can start to sense it in the world around them and start to like want to gain it more, gain it back. It just is sort of like a magnetism for them. You could go either of those routes.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting take on that.
I definitely love the idea of a planet breaking apart and a giant phoenix coming out. That's really cool.
Yeah, but what happens when it's suddenly in a void and has no oxygen and?
Well, I mean, if this is a fantasy world, then fire can burn in space for all I care. Like, of course.
Yeah.
In fact, you can imagine comets as like a phoenix traveling between solar systems and like coming in to inhabit another planet. And these are sort of a globe, like maybe the version of it that we've been talking about is this sort of offshoot, like these are like we said, it's the phoenix fire being expelled out of the planet and forming its own little life cycle, but that the main life cycle is actually like comets moving between solar systems and like crashing into planets and, seeding them with a giant phoenix inside.
So another interesting thing is a lot of common imagery associated with phoenixes is the Phoenixes.
Phoenixi? I don't know. Phoenixes, I believe, is the
well, it's sun imagery is what it's commonly associated with them. So what if like the end goal for every phoenix is to return to the sun, and to do that it has to consume the planet to become large enough to like escape Earth's orbit or gravity by basically destroying Earth.
Yeah.
And then return to the void in the sun.
According to Wiktionary, the plural of phoenix is phoenix or phoenixes or phoenices. So all of those are good. Anyway, sorry.
All right.
That was just me being distracted for a second. What I'm actually thinking is, what if the end stage of a phoenix is to be a sun? Like rather than like consuming it and like taking it over, it's just that like in this universe that we're creating, where this is such an important part of them traveling between worlds and stuff, like they hatch inside of a planet, and then when they get big enough, like they consume enough worlds, they find a nebula and they become dormant and become suns, and then planets form around them because of their large gravitational pull. And or maybe they even, before they settle, maybe they sort of nest like a bird, and they gather all of this matter together and form some planets, lay their eggs inside of it, and then be the sun for the solar system that is filled with phoenix eggs. That's a really cool imagery.
I also like there's just there's a powerful imagery to a story that like starts off like the galaxy was on fire.
Oh yeah, and that, what? That's how our universe starts. Is the average temperature is very hot to begin with, and things have just been sort of slowly cooling since then.
That's true.
in the beginning there was fire is a great start, and then the fire, I don't know, it gathered tinder for itself and stuff like that. You could write a whole mythology around that. And you can make a religion out of this, to quote Bill Words.
Yeah, the initial Big Bang was just the Phoenix.
I definitely, it seems like almost what this idea is now screaming out for is the animals of the other elements. Like we've got this solar system creating and like destroying, simultaneously creating and destroying solar systems, the Phoenix. It feels like we almost need something to explain the water and the air and stuff as well.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not sure where to go on that one exactly, but like, because honestly, you could kind of combine water and air. There's water and water vapor, and oxygen is a fairly common part of atmospheres and things like that. So if you wanted to sort of combine those two together, you could, and maybe have water and air together, and it'd be ice as a separate one.
Okay, yeah.
As the sort of phases of matter being slightly different. Actually, that's not bad at all. Instead of it being water, fire, earth, and air, it's more like solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. And like plasma gets lumped into fire in this case. And so it's not the element of earth, it's the element of solids is actually a really neat idea.
Okay, yeah.
Let's see, what's a good animal to associate with, let's say, solids? Like moles? No, moles don't. Dung beetles.
Hell yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they roll up matter. And like sort of congeal it, and they make these things. It's sort of like this. So they're very insect-like, where they've got these arms and segments on their bodies and things. And they're sort of made of rock, and they're gathering up these materials. And then they're in their like late stage, when they're the biggest and the most powerful. That's when they're sort of floating through space, gathering up little bits of rocks and things and little tiny particles, and rolling them into what will become the Phoenix eggs. These are the lumps of matter that the Phoenixes lay their eggs inside of when they make a solar system.
Okay, interesting. And then your sort of gaseous state.
Yeah, gaseous is interesting. I kind of want to go jellyfish, something along those lines, where it's like kind of bulbous and with tentacles.
Yeah,
because that's
can't go wrong with tentacles.
We already used birds, so it seems like we should go for something not birds for gas at that point. And the idea of these big sacks of gas, they're sort of cloud-like, In fact, maybe in a bunch of these worlds, when you see these creatures, the gas elementals, that like they look like clouds. They just kind of, you look up in the sky and you just see a fluffy cloud, and not know that like within it is a like an elemental with all of its tentacles and things like that gathering up gas.
So do these other elemental spirits or beings have a similar life cycle to Phoenixes, or do they have their own kind of mythology and life cycle?
I think we've got to have something of their own, like it's, I don't think they've got the same sort of death and rebirth thing, because they're not the fire, like fire and plasma is sort of impermanent and ephemeral, whereas the other three are much more stable. They kind of have to be different to me in that way.
I kind of like the idea that like maybe these solids, like they don't actually have, like they can't actually die. They're just broken into smaller components.
Yeah.
And it just becomes more spread out until it can be re-aggregated.
Yes. Yeah. Like they're not so much like they're not a fire that lives within something else. They're really just like animate matter.
Yeah.
And maybe like, you know what? Maybe one of the like, maybe they are in with like similarly to there's Phoenix fire in all like life. Maybe there's like whatever essence is within these solid ones. It's within all solids. It's within all matter, and it's just a matter of how much of it is accreted together. And so if they gather up a lot of matter like into a planet-sized object, if it's left alone, eventually it'll coagulate into one of these galactic-sized matter elementals. But if a phoenix lays its egg inside, then it's going to burst out into a phoenix at some point. Like it's one of those, like they're almost acting like a cuckoo at that point, where they're coming in and taking over someone else's egg. But that like, this crust and like a planetary crust and stuff like that is filled with the same sort of energy that these matter elementals have. And so maybe that's some of the animus behind, like that's how creatures move and stuff like that, is because the phoenix fire activates some of that matter animus.
Interesting.
That could be cool. And I love the idea of like of ice and solid being like together, you know, like ice and earth are part of the same element.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool. So like the icy fields of Jupiter and stuff like that are just the same as like the soil of Earth in this way.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
And maybe so we're missing one. We have birds for phoenixes. We've got dung beetles for elemental or earth element, solid elementals. We've got jellyfish as air. What's water?
Or liquid elemental.
Mm-hmm.
The maybe obvious one would be some sort of fish or aquatic creature, but
yeah,
I kind of like the idea that maybe it's not so directly tied.
Yeah, it could be, or maybe something like kind of wormy, like a tapeworm or a flatworm.
Interesting.
You know, it's sort of long and slender and has a kind of wriggling quality to it. That seems very liquidy to me, just in terms of associations. That would be one way to go with it. The other option is something like there's like slime molds and things which are just incredibly liquid. Like they're just like animated liquid by themselves.
And they're just giant amoeba.
Yeah, basically. That's interesting. So, and liquid tends to only exist kind of on the edges. Like it's really only like you're only going to get like large amounts of liquid in areas where there is a solid and probably also a phoenix around, because things are only going to be liquid when it's warm. And so that sounds almost like the liquid elementals are kind of parasitic to me. Like they only exist when these other when the other elementals are there. And so like they're, I guess, in that case, like a flatworm is kind of makes sense because they sort of live within these other elementals and only kind of sprout to the surface when conditions are right.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a really interesting take on that.
Yeah. I love it when we start with one idea, we end up making a whole ecosystem.
Yeah, it's one of the best things we do with this is just going on complete tangents.
Yeah. No, the tangents are cool. So we've got, Phoenix fire, we've got the solid, the bugs of solidity. I don't know what to call them.
That sounds like somebody's hit album.
And then we've got the parasitic liquid and these gaseous jellyfish. Man, this is all like I've got Spelljammer on the brain because like flying a ship with sails through space with all of these various creatures in it just sounds like so cool.
Yeah.
And like, on board you have like, oh man, I'm almost imagining like a Beagle-like voyage, like the HMS Beagle that Darwin was on, where it's they're off doing something, presumably. Maybe it's scientific gathering is their mission, but like you've got some people on board who are like trying to put together this cosmology and trying to like observe all of these various elementals at their various life stages in order to sort of figure out how all of the pieces fit together. That would be a really compelling idea to me.
Yeah, that'd be a really interesting like maybe short story or novel.
Like campaign setting. Like I'm deep into RPGs at the moment. So like the idea of a world where an RPG where instead of like, oh, we're going to go someplace and we're going to kill some dudes and take their treasure, and that sort of imperialistic setup that like so many high fantasy games are sort of built around, because that's what the lineage is from. Instead, it's more about like, we're going to go here and observe, and we're going to learn things about the world from our observations.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea.
And using that as like making that as your reward mechanism. Like that's the cycle, is to go out and learn and discover, would be really compelling. That sounds really fun to me.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, you're basically just like rewarding the players for reading your book, though.
No, actually, if we're going to get into game design, then the idea is that everybody sits down at the table. Maybe it's GM-less at that point, but everybody sits down at the table, and you are coming up with these things as you play. Where as you go out onto your ship and fly through the skies and whatever, where, I don't know, maybe one of your moves or whatever, you roll some dice and you get a chance to like declare truths about the universe. And then like everybody works together to sort of figure out how all of this works.
I'm just remembering that philosophy-based Dresden Kodak game from so long ago.
I would play the hell out of that, man.
Oh, yeah.
Although, again, that one had a great emphasis on combat.
That's true.
Well, I think on that note, we've kind of circled back around to a nice closing point. So
sure.
I think we're going to end it there. Yeah, well, bye.
See you later.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. You can find links and show notes at our website, monsterpod.org. Or if you'd like to support us, head on over to patreon.com/monsterpod. We can be found on Twitter at monstermpod, or you can email us at monstermechanicspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by Scott Paladin. This episode was hosted by Scott Paladin and Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas produced during this podcast are released under a do what the fuck you want public license.